Good afternoon to everybody, to all of our attendees, and welcome to the first Visitor Economy panel of 2021. When we began these panels in collaboration with Marketing Liverpool back in March of 2020, I'm sure none of us anticipated that we would still be here at this period in the beginning of 2021 and experiencing the lockdown that we are at this moment in time. But I think clearly, at the beginning of our webinar series for 2021, when we will be talking about how we can recover the visitor economy through this year, I think it would be remiss of us not to begin that by remembering that sadly this country passed the very somber mark of over 100,000 people who have died from COVID so far during the pandemic. And that emphasizes the importance of the work that all of us are doing to try and secure our city by staying safe, by ensuring that we follow all of the guidelines at this moment in time. And it is essential that we do that. And I'm delighted that Shane will be joining us very shortly after this, just to progress through where we are at the current position. But just to say, also, thank you for sending in your questions for today's panel. We've had quite a few specific questions around St. John's Market and City Council matters. And so as we've got limited time this morning, this afternoon, should I say, with Wendy, the acting mayor of Liverpool, those questions have been passed to her and her team to deal with directly. But Wendy, if I can come to you. So Wendy Simon, you're no stranger to the visitor economy. Obviously, your role leading, as cabinet member, leading the visitor economy in the city for many, many years. And obviously a very successful period that this city was moving forward through the visitor economy, but until March of 2020, and obviously we know what's happened over those last 10 months. But this third lockdown in particular really has impacted the visitor economy, businesses especially hard. Morale is extremely low. You know, we with the second lockdown in November, and thankfully, because of all the work that the city did, we were able to come out into tier 2 that benefited us as a city and our visitor economy. But then we've come out of Christmas into this very harsh lockdown period. So the question that everybody wants to know, and I'm sure we'll have lots of questions for, is how are we going to come out of this? How is the light in the tunnel? How are you in your role now as acting mayor of the city, leading the city forward?
I think, as you've just explained, Bill, this third lockdown period has been extremely difficult for everybody. You know, we're nearly 12 months since the first one began. It's a winter period. You know, people were hoping, you know, once we went into tier 2, before the new strain of the virus came out, that we were on that road to the recovery, that, you know, people would have a really successful Christmas. And again, they'd be able to spend time with the loved ones. And then we'd be working towards the spring, you know, certainly with numbers continuing to decrease. The vaccine was just beginning to be rolled out, and, you know, people were quite optimistic. And then those numbers, first of all, in London and the South started to rise. And we saw the same here, given we were tier 2, seeing a lot of people coming into the city from surrounding areas in the northwest and even further afield, either to use the retail or the hospitality offer. I think sort of in coming out and people saying light at the end of the tunnel, I think the vaccine certainly is one of the major things, and I'm sure Shane will touch on that in his presentation and questions later. Certainly what we believe is to get that vaccine rolled out as quickly and as effectively as we can, particularly to those more vulnerable groups, and certainly into communities, and certainly into workplaces as well, as quickly as we can. We are speaking to government nationally to see if we can have a local pilot, a bit like the mass testing pilot that went extremely well, and certainly was able to identify areas and communities. And what we're seeing now is all the lessons that we have learned from that, we could adapt for a mass vaccination programme, which would really help us and also help businesses. Because again, you know, sort of people are coming really sort of used to going for regular testing, because that testing has continued right throughout this time. People are now using that quite regularly to make sure it is safe, and certainly businesses are looking at how they can use that, and I'm sure the visitor economy and hospitality sector can also look from that. We've also from day one had our recovery planning with government in respect of how the city comes out of this. We still have big plans for the city. Some of those big projects that we were planning on are still going ahead. We've started the work on the pop-up studios on Edge Lane. Filming has been a massive thing, and I know certainly before this lockdown, that did keep a lot of the hotels going when business was quite low, when people weren't traveling. So the work started on there, that should be completed soon. And there's also plans, within that recovery plan around sort of our cultural offer, our tourism offer. And I know certainly Chris Brown and the team in Marketing Liverpool have done a great job working with Visit England and also the government in securing an offer to get people, to come back to Liverpool again as well. And that's been a real coup. So there's a whole host of things. I think as well, businesses have adapted. It's been a really tough time for everyone, particularly for those self-employed, for freelancers as well. And certainly, and I know Robin will be speaking later as well, as we adapt our cultural programme going forward, we're going to concentrate on events as well that can also try and support all of those who've been most hit as well in any ways. And certainly, obviously, events will be very different going forward, but certainly we're ready as soon as we can, start to open up the city, have events on, really sort of be ready to go on day one.
Thanks, Wendy. That's good to know that there is light, but the question, we thought it was going to be a very bright light just as we turn Christmas, but it's still there. Whilst you just touched on the fact that businesses are suffering in the visitor economy, and businesses of all sizes, whether they're large national organisations, smaller independents, or indeed freelancers, and your team within revenues and benefits have been very much right at the core of ensuring that the money that's coming out from government, and I know that's not of sufficient quantity or level at this moment in time, and I know you're doing a lot of work with government to make them understand that this sector needs a lot more support, but also your team are working very hard in getting the monies out as quickly as possible. Is there anything you want to say to our attendees today about how you're working with them to get that resolved?
Yeah, certainly sort of as these grants progress and sort of as the pandemic has progressed, obviously that those systems have got quicker. Sometimes, sort of we've been bound by government criteria in relation to a lot of those grants. So, so it's not at our discretion a lot of the time. Some of the grants as well have come by the Liverpool City Region as well. We're working really closely with them with all of our recovery programme. Obviously, it's really important for the city region as a whole that we come through this crisis well, because obviously it benefits, our surrounding boroughs as well, who quite often benefit from the offer that's in Liverpool itself for them. There's quite a lot of schemes that are available, and sort of probably take up the whole 10 minutes to go through them. So it's probably easier to, if people search on the Liverpool City Council website, and that actually does summarize all of those. And I know that we're trying to make that smarter each time sort of new support comes out. There's also been business support that's been offered from Invest Liverpool and from other places as well, in respect of businesses. The local restriction support grant is currently helping a lot of businesses, and it's the final day today, so if people haven't got their applications in to apply for the self-employment income support scheme, sorry, not today, tomorrow, so people have got a full day. But as you said, Bill, we recognise that's not enough. There's a lot of people, sort of who've been excluded, who don't meet the criteria for grants, or even where they meet them, it's not enough to meet the needs of that business. I think through the first lockdown, and particularly where people were furloughed and they had some of the rate support and grant and stuff, so that was helping people. But as that progresses, obviously there's no income coming in, and people are still having the overheads of the businesses, or if they're self-employed, they're not getting any work at all. So we recognise this period has been much harder, and we're really, really pressing hard with government. We're pressing hard within our own funds to see how we can, you know, release them up to those particular groups. And certainly I know the team are working on ideas at the moment in relation to, you know, if further funding comes along, how we can do that. As I said, as I started this bit of the answer, the actual criteria quite often isn't within our control. Quite often we're just passporting those grants, and I know it's really frustrating for people, particularly where they don't feel, you know, sort of they should be excluded, or they feel the process is a bit long. But the team are working round the clock, you know, to get them out as quickly as they can, and certainly they quite often have to have sight of documents, etc. With some of the grants, and that sometimes holds things up.
And I suppose it's also important to note that as we, in different parts of the visitor economy and the different businesses that are struggling at the moment, the City Council is also, because of self-isolation, working from home. It's you've not had full teams operating within the City Council offices for the last 10 months, have you? So that's
no, we haven't.
a difficulty for you.
What we have done is we have tried to actually boost those teams. So obviously, and where people aren't in the normal workplace, the one-stop shops, other places, we've gone in to support that team, you know, and help them. But again, sometimes the volume far outweighs, you know, the people working on it. And certainly, you know, if people are searching around for documents, etc., sometimes you get a lot in right near the, you know, the end of that application period. So yeah, certainly I know some of the new ones that have just come out, people didn't have to reapply if they still qualified. That was a bit confusing because people were getting a remittance note, but they weren't sure what the money was for and stuff. So, you know, so we're learning all the time. This is a new situation for us all, and obviously we're trying to, you know, sort of operate as quickly as we can under that limited staffing, as you said. But, you know, really do appreciate the struggle that people are going through, particularly those who are getting no income whatsoever.
Thanks, Wendy. It's great having you leading the council at this moment in time, obviously with your vast experience and passion for the visitor economy. So thank you for finding some time today to join us. And clearly the questions are available, and we will direct any questions through to you and your team. But thank you for that, Wendy. If I can, thanks a lot. If I can now turn to Paul and Shane.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Shane Knott, one of the key people within the public health for the Liverpool City Council, and also Paul Askew, I'm sure, is no stranger to anybody in the visitor economy in Liverpool. If anybody's followed his social media, you'll know all about the work that Paul's doing, both through the art school, but also within Liverpool Hospitality Association. So Shane, if I can come to you first of all, and just really, what's the current position? You know, we hear lots of things. We listen to various press briefings from Number 10 and various other places. What's the current position here on the ground in Liverpool with COVID-19?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk through a bit of the COVID context, you know, the kind of current situation that we've got here in Liverpool, and some of the challenges that we're facing, and a bit about the current position with some of those things. So in the last 7 days in Liverpool, we've had 2,559 positive cases, which was actually a decrease of about 1,300 on the previous week. So the current infection rate is declining, which is good news. It's currently around 513 people per 100,000 of the population. It's a measure that we use to compare different cities and different places. That's less than half of what it was at the beginning of January. On the 8th of January, it was 1,150 per 100,000. That was the highest rate that we've ever seen in the city. But obviously, we've seen time and time again that the rate goes up like a rocket and then comes down very slowly like a parachute. So we're not out of the woods with this yet. But following on from the success that we had back in November with the testing pilot, we're continuing to adapt the smart testing approach to try and reduce the infection rate as far as possible in the city so that we can emerge from lockdown in the lowest possible tier. So the asymptomatic testing is continuing in the city for all those that need to leave their home to go to work. And it's a slight change in the message. And that those that don't need to leave home to go to work and are able to adhere to the kind of lockdown message and stay at home don't necessarily need to be tested unless they are displaying symptoms. The lateral flow tests are particularly good at detecting a high viral load in people that don't show any symptoms. So they've got a vital role in identifying positive cases among people who need to come into contact with others during their work and in getting them to isolate. So in the last week, about 20% of all of the cases that we identified in Liverpool, we were done using the lateral flow kits. They're not in themselves the golden ticket to managing the infection rates, but they are a critical part of our response to the pandemic in Liverpool. Obviously, what's even more critical is that once people have got that test result that's positive, that they are able to isolate, and obviously employers across the city have got a huge influence in enabling people to self-isolate. In terms of the hospital admissions, obviously we see a lot about this every day on the TV, but the hospital admissions are expected to peak in Liverpool this week. We currently have more patients in Liverpool beds than at any time during the first and second wave. The bed occupancy is in surge capacity, and it's going to be above capacity for the next couple of weeks into February. Peak hospital admissions will follow with a peak in intensive care unit admissions. That's an internal thing then, about 10 to 14 days later. And then the peak in mortality will follow a further week to 10 days after that. So we've got another few weeks of, unfortunately, bad news to look forward to. And the impact of that, of course, is in the delays that we see to other non-emergency procedures that can't be done because of it. As Bill said at the beginning, we passed a difficult and really unwelcome milestone this week. It's left all of us really asking why, how have we ended up in this situation? But the good news is, of course, that the big development around the approval of 2 vaccines and the rollout of the vaccination program.
Let me try to retrieve Shane.
And while you do that, if I can just turn to you, Paul.
Yes, indeed.
So I don't know where Shane's gone, but obviously, Paul, third lockdown we know is a disaster coming after Christmas, and it came. I mean, obviously we heard just before New Year's Eve that you were closed with immediate effect almost. That was a devastating blow, wasn't it, to the sector? We know the impact that that's had on people. So how is it for you in the art school at the moment and your colleagues across hospitality, many of whom will be on this call?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think you're quite right that the blow of New Year's Eve was quite a hammer blow, and a lot of us just had to adapt very quickly and try and turn that into a at-home box scheme or just some way of sort of moving stock and making sure that our guests, many of them who prepaid, were taken care of. So it was a real sort of crisis moment. But you know what? In some ways, we've got used to that over the last 10 months, and I think a lot of the businesses who will be on the call and in our membership have adapted into diversification of a little bit of retail for food and drink, a little bit of at-home provision, wine and beer deliveries, things like this, just to keep us going. But I think the biggest hit for us on that occasion was the morale. I think we were all feeling that we'd worked so hard to stay open for Christmas, and we were just about to reach what we thought the finish line was after New Year, and of course we didn't quite make it. But I think there is positivity out there, but at the moment I think people are still sort of licking their wounds and coming to terms with what this next section of the lockdown is going to mean.
And just in terms of your own staff within your brigade, how are you keeping them going?
Well, we're all on flexible furlough, and what we've tried to do is rotate them so that they're at least coming in 1 or 2 days a week in terms of keeping the Emporium open, keeping the art school at home boxes going, and rather than bring one specific team in, I think it's important that you rotate that and make sure that people aren't feeling left out or sat at home, and that mental health impact that we all talk about is real. We all need, especially in hospitality, by definition, we are people who enjoy being around other people and looking after people. So if you don't have that interaction, it hurts us more than you can ever imagine. So we've been doing a lot of that. We've been doing some online training in terms of wine training and talking about how we're going to come out of this. sadly, we were looking forward to things like the Grand National returning, which is looking extremely unlikely now. And I'm waiting with bated breath to hear from Robin to see what we might be able to do later in the year. But no, I think hospitality across the city is really trying to work through the grant system, understand what we can apply for. We're very grateful for City Council, who've just provided a top-up fund today, which will, not only go to people who like myself are trying to stay above water, but also for people who maybe have fallen through the gaps before, who don't pay business rates because they pay it as part of their rent, or they pay through an umbrella business. We've got to target these little artisans and these little independents that will basically lose the identity of Liverpool if we don't look after them. So, there's lots of lobbying happening, lots of hard work. You've probably seen we've done a lot of work with Seat at the Table as well. I don't know if you've seen the campaign where we've really tried hard to get a Minister for Hospitality, which is on Boris's desk, actually. So there's further pressure required to make him look at that properly after having cross-party support for that. So lots going on. I don't know. It feels like we're fighting on so many fronts, Bill, to be honest. We've still got the insurance issue going on, even though the Supreme Court hearing was won. There are still individual cases that have to be looked at. So yeah, there's no real light at the end of the tunnel. We've just got to keep on keeping on, as I always say.
Okay, Paul. So you have changed your business model at this moment in time because you've gone to the art school emporium, and the art school cellar it's turned into a retail element. How much of that will you keep with once we start moving into open? Will you diversify into that as well as we reopen?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that's come out of this, Bill, and I hope my colleagues on the call will feel the same, in that, sometimes in adversity you get forced to think outside the box and innovate. And some of the things that we've done through the lockdown over the last 12 months have actually really worked. And I think what we've learned is that the retail element of the emporium was needed anyway, and there were guests who were having dinner with us and then wanting to buy their truffle honey or a nice bottle of wine that they just tasted, or, oh, would you deliver this to home? And those sort of things I think will never leave us. That there's been some great successes there. And also I think as we come out of this, and I'm sure that we're going to be it's a very gradual opening with the tier system kicking in. I think the deliveries and the at home and the emporium will be needed for at least another 12, 18 months. So I think a lot of us will keep those elements and in a way future-proof us in case there are any more twists and turns and, dare I say, mutations of this dreadful thing moving forward, because we have to be prepared for that.
Yeah. So for those who are on our attendees today, what news have you got for next month that's coming up? We know there's a big day coming on February the 14th.
Yeah, well, I think even in a normal year.
Put the plug in, Paul.
Yes, this is the shameless plug moment, is it? Okay. Well, even in a normal year, we always, as hospitality workers, look forward to Valentines, because we always believe that once you hit Valentines, the economy starts to wake up again, because January is usually a dead month after the feast of December. So yeah, we've just launched all our new Valentine's products on the website, which is little gifts that can be delivered home, champagne, chocolates. Also, of course, a full range of at-home boxes there to spoil your partners. And I know Robin's already put an advance order in for at least 4, so there'll be a steward's inquiry there, I think. But no, we're looking forward to getting that going, and as I say, keeping as many people busy as we can and keeping the wheels of gastronomy turning.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that, and thank you for all that you do on behalf of the visitor economy here in Liverpool, obviously across in the world, in your leadership of the World's Visitor Economy Board, but also as co-chair of Liverpool Hospitality. And indeed, you are an echo, a mirror of what else other successful business operators are doing in the city. We have some great diverse offers, which really are helping get our city through this. Shane is back with us now. Thanks, Paul. Shane obviously had technical issues. One of the things that we find out on Zoom is if your computer decides to reboot, it just has a mind of its own. But thanks for coming back, Shane. So I'll come back to you on those specific questions that we've just been talking through the testing process. I had a couple of questions. One of the questions about why do we use the lateral flow tests when the positivity rate is not as high as other forms of test?
Well, the lateral flow tests perform a slightly different function to the other tests that we utilise. The PCR tests are the ones that we use for symptomatic testing, and they're obviously a much more sensitive test, and will pick up a viral load, a much smaller viral load in a patient. So we use those to kind of diagnose the presence of coronavirus. And with the lateral flow tests, they have a slightly different range of detection. So they will detect a slightly higher rate of viral load. So where we have people who don't have symptoms but do have coronavirus there, the lateral flow tests are very good at picking those up. But they will, of course, because they have a slightly different range of detection, it means that they sometimes don't pick up the results that the PCR test would do. Hence the reason why we're not advocating the use of the lateral flow tests in highly clinical or vulnerable settings, so like care homes and that kind of thing. So there is a part to play with the lateral flow test, but alongside the symptomatic testing and alongside all of the other measures that we've got in place. I mean, I do bang on about this all the time, but I think one of the critical things is about the non-medical interventions that we've all been asked to introduce. What we need fundamentally is when we are able to open up is to create as safe an environment as possible for people to visit. So the hands, face, space messages are critical. Following the COVID secure guidance in workplaces, making sure that we've got sanitizer, that we're taking bookings for groups of household sizes, and support bubbles. All those kinds of things, having very good infection control in the businesses. Those are the critical things that we need to be focusing on now. And then obviously everything else, the testing and the vaccination stuff will all follow on from that as well.
Thanks, Shane. Just touching on testing, I had a question from about testing centres within the commercial district. Obviously, people are working from home, but there are sections of our commercial district, particularly in the legal professions where the courts are still open, that do require still testing. And whether the testing centre in the town hall proved very popular, is there any view on reopening that testing centre in the town hall?
No, it's a good question. I think obviously with when the lockdown was introduced, the capacity for testing obviously wouldn't have needed to be as great with as many testing centres anyway, because the focus is then about supporting those people that do need to leave home to go to work. Obviously within the city centre, we do have the exhibition centre test site that's still available, so people can go there. We obviously don't have the same capacity that we had during the initial pilot phase back in November, and we are looking to kind of continually secure the testing facilities and the test kits themselves so that we can continue to deliver them. But it looks at the moment like the capacity that we've got and the locations that we've got are accessible for people. So if there's a definite great need in the town hall, then obviously we can look at that as a team and see what we can do.
Thanks, Shane. So if we can come down, one of the things we need to do to get this light in the tunnel to be full light, so we're out, is getting the vaccinations into people's arms, getting the bulk of the population vaccinated. So at this moment in time, I understand Liverpool and the Northwest are doing very well in terms of vaccinating. In fact, so far ahead that they've had to be slowed down because of the issue is the supply of vaccines. What's your thoughts on the vaccination program? When will the bulk of people, you believe, providing we can get the vaccines through, be vaccinated in the city?
Yeah, I was just about to go on to that in my update before I was rudely taken offline. But yeah, in terms of Liverpool's progress so far, we're making very, very good progress so far. We're obviously working with colleagues in the CCG and primary care to open up the vaccination centres in the hospitals and also in the community as well. We've got 11 vaccination centres open at the moment, and there are more that are due to be open this week. as well as some additional vaccination sites through pharmacies in the north and south of the city. At the moment, they're working their way through the first 4 priority groups with a government target of offering the first dose to those 4 priority groups by the 21st of February. So those groups include the over 80s, the over 70s, the clinically extremely vulnerable. It's pleasing to hear that in the over 80s in particular, that we've vaccinated 75% of the over 80s so far. So Liverpool is making really good progress. Following on from the 21st of February, obviously there's the additional kind of 5 priority groups that have been identified, and the government target around that one is to have people vaccinated by, or to offer the first dose by the 19th of April. And thereafter, the remaining kind of, 16 to 50-year-old sort of group, the rest of us, I guess, will then be offered the vaccination. Obviously, what we're aiming for really is the herd immunity, which we'll achieve if we get to 80% of vaccinations. But there are some significant challenges that we're going to face with this as well. Logistically, like you say, at the moment it's kind of dependent upon the supply of the vaccine, and we're in the thick of it really, with the rest of the world also demanding the supply of vaccines. So that is a massive challenge. But in terms of actually rolling it out and people's role in this, obviously people are asking a lot of questions about the vaccine, about how safe is it, can we go back to normal once we've had it? Is it the end of the pandemic if we get the vaccination delivered? And they're all perfectly rational questions to ask. There's a lot of misinformation out there that we need to combat, and obviously, but we also need to give people the space to ask the questions that they need to ask to understand how safe it is and be reassured. We already know that there's vaccine hesitancy among certain groups. So people from workers from lower SES groups, and older people from Black and ethnic minority groups, young women who are concerned about fertility issues, and young professionals as well. So we're working together with the CCG, with the NHS, to try and put that information together and give people the opportunity to speak to the GP, to speak to health professionals and trusted people, to try and get that reassurance. So we're working through that at the moment.
Thanks, Shane. So the message is for us in the sector at this moment in time: follow the guidance, as you say, follow those non-medical aspects of it, the simple things, washing hands, face, space, and when we get the opportunity, go and get vaccinated. And if any of our families who do get selected, encourage them to go for it. Thank you for that, Shane.
Okay, no worries.
And you'll stay on for the questions and answers at the end. But if I can now just pass across to Chris to talk about the next steps, what will happen within our visitor economy as we start to move forward. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thanks Bill, and thanks Shane and Paul for your insights on that. The context for this part of the panel conversation is really looking at our plans really as the light of that particular tunnel starts to open up a little bit more and becomes a little bit more brighter. And we've had we've enjoyed a very good close working relationship with Visit Britain and Visit England, and it's delightful to have Emma on the call today. And in a second, I'll pass over to Emma to just kind of run through how she sees sort of from a national perspective. And once we've got that kind of national thing, because obviously for us, a lot of the content that we will be developing, we want to amplify through the Visit England channels. And to talk a bit more about what that content plan looks like, Robin will kind of join in around the back of this conversation with once we've heard from Emma. I think the key issue for all of us in this space is that none of us are masters of understanding exactly when the perfect time to deliver any of this is. But I think what we want to do today, I think as much as anything, is provide hope and confidence that there are plans afoot, that there are ambitions ahead, and that Liverpool, like it did, I think, in the June period when it came out of that lockdown, and also when we had the mass testing in the tier process, that the city is ready to be out of the starting gate as quickly and as safely as possible at the right time. So let me hand over to you, Emma. I know you've got a few slides you want to refer to as well. So as I say, great to have you joining us today, and look forward to your presentation on this.
Thanks, Chris. Really pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen because I think it will be helpful to point towards a couple of data pieces that we've got to help illustrate some of the plans that we're putting in place. So I will focus on the domestic market today. I think we can confidently say that that will be the first opportunity as we come out of lockdown. And we saw that already last summer, and hopefully we will be seeing it again this year. So at the moment we run a domestic sentiment tracker, which measures every 2 weeks attitudes and sentiment towards travel within the UK. And we've been doing this now since the first lockdown. So we have a significant number of reports, and we can look at the trends that we're seeing. But first of all, if we look here at confidence and the ability to take a UK overnight trip, we can see that confidence increases significantly in that summer period. So starting to go up around June, and then July to September, a big opportunity. So we can see there's confidence in the summer, but ideally we'll be coming out of lockdown and starting to reopen earlier than that. So part of our planning is looking at how we can support the industry as soon as we do emerge from lockdown, whenever that is. And again, this data here looks at when people anticipate going on their next UK overnight trip. And you can see that there's 21% planning kind of between April and June. But again, it does jump to 25% in the summer. And there is quite a large percentage at the moment who don't have any plans, but that's a group that maybe we can persuade. One of the trends that we have seen over the last year is kind of really short booking windows. And I expect we'll see that again. I think at the moment, the lack of confidence is because we are in this lockdown scenario and we don't know exactly when we will emerge. But for our planning, we're going to have to make some guesses and some hypotheses so that we can get plans in place. So for the domestic market, our hypothesis is that we should be able to switch our sort of campaign messaging back on in April or May, depending on exactly kind of what the post-lockdown scene looks like. It depends on kind of the tiers and whether they will be the same tiers as before, how much of the population will be in those tiers. So what we're doing is speaking really closely with our colleagues at Government, DCMS, Cabinet Office, and we'll be looking to agree some triggers that determine when we can switch our paid campaign activity back on. So in terms of an advertising campaign, the sorts of triggers that we think maybe we'll need to agree are around what percentage of the population need to be in tiers 1 or 2 or their equivalents and able to freely travel. There's a fine line between kind of a messaging that promotes, going out and travel and spending money, and government advice that's telling people to stay at home. So we need to get that right. We'll also be watching carefully the vaccination plan and making sure that's on track. And we'll also be looking at the sentiment tracker as well. I think that intent to visit, that positive intent, needs to be there so that if we are spending money, encouraging travel, we've got a group of people that can deliver quick wins for the industry and get that spend and value back. At the moment on our channels, we are still using owned and earned. We're not doing anything. We're using our website, our social channels, and doing a lot of kind of proactive consumer PR outreach. And we're pushing an escape the everyday at home message. So hearing about the at-home boxes and things like that, that's exactly the type of content that we are pushing out so that we can support businesses that have found ways to adapt and take their offering kind of in a different direction. And there's some really brilliant examples of that out there. And I'd encourage you on our corporate website, VisitBritain.org. We've got information about the types of content that we're looking to push out. So if you've got relevant stuff to share with us, then I would really encourage businesses to do that. And we'll see if we can include it within our content channels. But also, the escape the everyday branding, the hashtag, etc., is there to be used. We want as many people as possible to use that. And then the plan post-lockdown would be to continue the Escape the Everyday campaign that we launched last year. As I said, we've seen that there is intent there for the summer. There's less intent for spring. So I think our role once we are reopened is really to drive that spend and visitation between April and June outside of that main summer period, so that we are supporting businesses to get that value back as quickly as possible. But then during the summer, I think that there is a role for us to play in really supporting cities specifically. I think we saw last summer, the impact of losing that inbound travel market was there for cities. And I think, you know, we don't know when inbound travel will return in large volumes. But again, our hypothesis at the moment is that we don't know whether it will be in time for summer. So I think we need to look at the domestic market and the role that can play really in supporting cities during the summer. So I hope that we will be able to work with Liverpool and other cities to really define that city proposition and make sure that we're marketing cities in a way that appeals to kind of the consumer motivations and barriers that we're seeing. So making sure we address their safety concerns, but also making sure that, you know, we give them the opportunity to see cities maybe in a new light at that time of year. We're also continuing with our We're Good to Go safety sort of reassurance mark. So if you're not familiar with it, it's an industry standard that businesses can apply for, which will indicate that they are adhering to government guidelines in their operations. So they have the right social distancing, cleanliness measures, etc. in place. So if that isn't something that you've got already, then please do sign up for that. That's a real kind of mark of reassurance that you can use at your business and give confidence to consumers when they are traveling, when they are out and about on the ground. In terms of the audience opportunity, that's something that we're looking at the data to see what that points towards. Last year when we were active, we targeted the pre-nester audience, so your sort of 18 to 34-year-olds and families with preschool age children, so who aren't bound to only travel in the holidays. They were the best prospects, and at the moment, based on the current sentiment data that we've got, we are still seeing that they do indicate the best opportunity or the biggest value opportunity. But obviously we're watching that carefully to see what impact the vaccination, for example, might have on older audiences as well in increasing confidence. So the aim with Escape the Everyday campaign would be not to alienate any specific audience and for it to be as broad as possible, to work for as many as possible. And similarly to last year, we will have a campaign toolkit with all of the assets and content for destinations and businesses to use and to amplify as much as possible. And hopefully there'll be a time when we can work with media and influencers and actually get them out and about visiting and experiencing destinations again. From an inbound perspective, just to touch on it, I won't go into it in detail because I think there is more unknowns on the international side, and obviously there's been a lot in the news over the last couple of weeks around the borders and the new variants and the concern there. But our plan would be to roll out Escape the Everyday internationally as well and really make this a global campaign platform so that we are positioning Britain with one consistent voice and campaign message. In terms of when we can turn on paid activity internationally, again, we need to agree that with government based on a set of triggers. But what we are still doing is using our PR and B2B channels to ensure that Britain remains top of mind. So many of the virtual sorts of experiences that exist for UK audiences are also relevant internationally. We're also running things like Meet a Local, where we can kind of put forward local sort of spokespeople from across attractions experiences across the UK to do sort of Q&As for media internationally to produce, so that they can produce some coverage and just keep Britain visible. And I think internationally, our job this year is really to kind of drive that confidence in the UK and set the scene for 2022 when there are big events happening in Britain. So you've got Commonwealth Games, you've got the Jubilee, you've got Festival 2022. So this should be a massive year to really kind of put Britain out there on the world stage. And hopefully this year we can start to see some of that return of inbound travel to then make 2022 a really big year. So that's really, I think, what we're working towards. We've just been running some sentiment research internationally as well. We only launched this in December, so we've only got one wave of results so far. It should be available on our corporate website, visitbritain.org, shortly. But there's really positive signs there. The intent and the plans to travel internationally are very much still there. We ran this research in 14 markets, and we can see really strong intent. And the good news as well is with the markets that are planning to go to Europe, Britain is in the sort of top 2 or 3 destinations that they're looking at. There are a couple of markets where Britain has fallen down, But in a lot of markets, Britain is still up there and actually punching above its weight compared to, say, pre-COVID times, which is really good to see. And there's especially strong intent for England, which is good again for us. So that's really kind of a summary of our plans. We're trying to scenario plan it and produce. Right now, we're focusing on sort of producing assets and things like that we can have ready, so that when the time is right, we are ready to go, and we've got those plans in place.
That's great, Emma. Thanks very much. It's good to get that sort of international, domestic take from you in terms of. I think we would concur with you wholly that 21 is a domestic driven approach with a beginning of an international and near European messaging. So, Robin, can I come to you because I know we work with you very closely, and I know you've done God knows how many versions of recovery plan thinking. What's your sort of take on the how you're kind of developing that for Liverpool at the moment, where in this context of cities have been affected by far and away the worst, I think, out of this, and therefore potentially are the slowest back as well. So in terms of how you're kind of engineering and thinking around the things that are going to bring us back into the marketplace quicker and get those audiences back, what's your thinking there?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, I think Emma sort of hit on a lot of the themes really perfectly there. I think for us, it's I think what's really positive is that we've got an extraordinary amount of content in the pipeline, right? So there's a huge amount of content lined up. The kind of cultural sector, music sector, there's a huge amount of kind of pent-up demand in terms of the sector itself to deliver content. So what we've got is a lot of content. And what we've got working with you, Chris, and your colleagues is, I think, a really compelling kind of marketing message and a call to action. And so what we've really been doing over the past kind of a couple of months really is just building that framework, a framework which we know at the right moment in time we can begin to roll out. And so what that means is we don't really want to be saying, right, on the 1st of April, this is happening, on the 6th of April, this is happening. We just have to be far more flexible around it. And so I think, to be honest, Chris, this year, what we won't see is a summer in particular like we would traditionally see in Liverpool. We won't see big greenfield site festivals, I expect. I think the idea of really significant numbers of people coming together in confined spaces is going to be really, really challenging from a kind of logistics perspective, from a health perspective, from a messaging perspective, really, really challenging. And what we probably won't see is a major kind of event as we know it, industry returning in the summer months. So I don't think what we will see is that kind of bringing together of mass numbers of people into a small space for a weekend. And so what we've been looking to do is actually work with festivals, ourselves, our kind of program, to actually think about how we can essentially stretch out content over longer periods of time. So rather than focus things over one weekend, how we can actually bring things that might last for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, more installation-led. So still exciting, still kind of ambitious content, but much more about installations people can move through freely as opposed to standing and watching a stage. So actually what it's really about for us is about how we're taking that kind of level of creativity and content and the demand that we've got and actually playing it out in a different way in the city centre. And I think that's the really important thing here from a city centre perspective, is that we recognise the need to help drive footfall back into the city centre, but also it's a city centre that's going to enable festivals and cultural organisations and kind of festival content to begin to be able to play out again. So actually it does work quite well bringing those things together, that actually what we begin to do is reimagine the way that we would deliver content in a different context, i.e. the streets of the city over a longer period of time, and in turn use that as a way to drive people back in. So as opposed to it be 20,000 people turning up for an event on one night, it might be 20,000 people over 3, 4, 5 nights, which A, makes public health more comfortable about the fact that we're flowing people through the audience in that way, makes the audience feel more comfortable about the fact that they're going to have hopefully a kind of a situation that they feel safer in and can kind of choose their own kind of route through it. And also from our perspective, something that we know we can be far more flexible about managing and operating, because lots of people on this call will know, to turn around a big major event, we need sort of 6 months, 8 months planning time. We're just not going to have that really. So what we have been doing is planning in really brilliant kind of modular content that we know we can drop at the right moments. In terms of timeline, I think, again, kind of really just echoing Emma's point, I mean, I think that our sense is that sort of end of March is a moment where maybe we can begin to do some things that outdoor that begin to encourage people back into the city centre. And I don't mean that in a kind of like big major event perspective necessarily, but more, you know, high visibility kind of things that offer that hope, that idea that the city's beginning to reopen again. Again, working with public health, making sure this all feels right in terms of timings, but towards the end of March, that just pre that kind of Easter window possibly. And then that kind of April block very much is going to be a regional audience. You know, you can't imagine that there's going to be a huge amount of domestic travel outside of the city region, I'd imagine, during the April audience. So content within that period that very much attracts, supports that kind of local audience demographic, is able to kind of like support the cultural and arts sector re-emerging as well, exactly like hospitality is facing some big challenges around kind of ramping back up again, as does the kind of culture and arts sector. And then when you go beyond that into then, you know, and this is a very personal opinion, I think that kind of May half term, so end of May, sort of start of June, potentially feels like a moment in time where, you know, programming in terms of things that we might be able to do, we might be a bit more ambitious about the kind of content and the kind of messaging we might be able to talk through. So our ability to be able to, you know, scale things up over that period of time, all the time testing, making sure it's safe, making sure that audiences are kind of reacting and behaving in ways that we know we need them to, feels like the beginnings of something that actually sets you up for hopefully a summer whereby we can be producing lots of stuff and encourage people to come back and really exciting, ambitious things, but that won't look like a normal festival summer. It won't feel like a normal summer because it just won't be able to be. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be as exciting or as ambitious, just delivered in a different way, I think, Chris.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there, Robin, I think is just picking up a point that Shay mentioned earlier, as we come on the downside of this slope, and hopefully the downside of that slope is going to be gradual. And what we need to do is align the content that you're talking about there and begin to speed that up as that slope becomes a little bit more faster, but it's going to be slower. And I think what all of us want to do is to kind of see that we're not going to have another lockdown beyond this. But just a quick one before I hand back to Bill. I mean, I think there's no doubt that one of the successes of last year was the Liverpool Without Walls concept. I know you were heavily behind the kind of nature of that. I think just in terms of, I think of a direction of travel and the kind of reanimating of our public spaces, the pedestrianisation agenda that took place, that sort of outdoor provision for a lot of businesses. How do you see that playing through, and how do you see us building on what was that successful period over June going forward?
Yeah, I think that's the model, Chris. And I think, to be honest, that's the model not just in a pandemic space, but it's going to be the model for us over the coming years, I think. So we're just working at the moment with the Combined Authority and others around another phase of how we kind of extend Without Walls to the next level, really. Think about Without Walls, we turn that around in 4 weeks from initial idea to actually starting to kind of put some money into the marketplace. And we've had the time to really think about how we can begin to weatherproof things a bit better so they can become a 12-month offer rather than just kind of, you know, the clement months of the year. I think how we begin to do infrastructure slightly differently. So actually there's not such a demand for kind of cultural institutions and individual artists and performers to have lots of cost to deliver stuff, but actually how we can kind of make spaces almost up and ready for people to come in and be able to kind of animate them really simply. That's all stuff that we're hoping, Chris, to be able to roll out kind of from springtime onwards. So actually, you kind of serves two purposes. I mean, anyone that spent the summer on Castle Street just knows how good it felt. Like forgetting, and Bold Street, you know, forgetting anything around the pandemic just felt brilliant for people to be outside, you know, for us to be able to kind of create that kind of, I hate that term, sort of European feel, but actually that kind of feel of a sort of city turned inside out in many ways. I think that's just something that we'll get right, and we learned loads in the summer. Some bits worked really well, some bits didn't. You know, what we can learn from that but do it properly, so actually that can continue in 22, 23, 24 and become, you know, a real USP for Liverpool, I think. You know, we've got these big wide streets, we've got that really exciting food, hospitality and kind of cultural music offer that we can bring together. There's not that many cities in the UK that can offer that in the way that we can in such a sort of beautiful vista. So I think that's going to be a really important thing. I think the other thing I would say, Chris, and it's actually a question just popped up and I think you might want to talk to this too as well, is that I think what has come through during the pandemic is, and we've always wanted to be more city region wide in the way that we talk about the offer, but I think actually even more so now when you think about the fact that 5 minutes from, or 10 minutes from the centre of the city, you can be on a beach in the Wirral, you know, or 50 minutes up the road, you can be, you know, up at the Gormleys and Sefton. Actually, our ability to be able to talk to an audience, both regional, domestic and international, about you know, one centre which gives you an incredible city centre, you know, kind of European rich cultural experience, and then in the afternoon be able to be walking across one of those beautiful beaches in the country is a really, really unique proposition. And our ability to be able to kind of talk to that both helps us in terms of the narrative we're talking to audiences about, who want open air, who want spaces, all that stuff, as well as actually from a kind of like competitive proposition space, being able to kind of tie this thing together. I think that's going to be a really, really important way in which we can talk about the city. And I know I'm talking to my colleagues across the boroughs already in terms of how we program some things that begin to encourage audiences to do that as well, being led by content. So I actually think that I'm really excited about what we've got planned for 21. I mean, this is a really grim time. I have 3 kids at home with me, so like, hence why I look like this. But you know, the idea that we're able to, you know, we've done so much planning. We are ready to go, really. So as soon as, you know, Shane and the gang turn and say to us, right, this is looking like a timeline that's realistic, everyone needs to feel confident that we're lined up to be able to wheel those things in. It's not like we're going to reopen and think, right, what should we be doing now then? You know, we're ready to go. As soon as we've got that, we can begin to really, really, really push that stuff through. So it feels like, you know, this is really hard, but I think there absolutely is, from kind of that March, April, springtime, as long as we don't have any big kind of U-turns around the health agenda, I think our proposition and our offer in the market can be really, really, really fast out there and kind of quite aggressive in terms of just kind of how powerful we can be with that.
Okay, great, Robin. That's it. I mean, I think hopefully, you know, between Emma's insights at a national level and your insights at a local level, you know, in terms of, you know, giving confidence to our businesses that we have a plan afoot, but we're also thinking about that plan in a slightly different way. And I think this embracing of the wider assets of the city region plays well into that. I hope that gives the likes of you, Mr. Paul, a kind of confidence of belief that, you know, future is being looked at effectively, and that we have a plan ready to go when circumstances allow. Yeah. So thanks very much, Emma. You've put some very useful links on there, which I'm sure Alvaro will make sure everybody gets out. But in conscious of time, I'll hand back to yourself now, Bill, and I hope you found that session useful. We certainly did.
That's great. Thanks for that, Chris. And thank you for all joining us this Thursday lunchtime. Our visitor economy panels will continue, but we are moving them to a monthly panel. So our next panel will be on February the 25th, I do believe, if that's right. Yes. And that will be looking at some of those events that will be opening up during the summer. There are a number of questions that are still open on there. What we will do is provide responses to those on our social media, but all I have to do now is to say thank you for attending today. We look forward to hearing more and for you joining us again in the near future. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you all soon.